character, who dedicated his time and life fighting side by side with the working class and the poor to obliterate the cruel capitalist neoliberal policies, impoverishing the majority of our people. Comrades, let's welcome Comrade Dick Forslund.
Ulwazi! Ulwazi! Yeah. So I don't know if you back there can hear me, or if you, I don't know even if you can see if I would write something there. But I just put up this. This is a poem from the 1930s, from the communist. He made theater and poetry and so on, and he has a special meaning for a Swede because he was a refugee. He went into, he fled to Sweden in the 1930s from the Nazi dictatorship that came to power in Germany in 1930. And yeah, it's a very nice poem. It's also very nice in Swedish, I can say, this poem. But it's quite known in the Swedish labor movement. You should put your finger on every number and ask how it got there. So it's really about attending to details and preparing to take part. So I quite like it. But anyway, I don't see my slide myself. I have to do that. So this is about this government and pension funds, and someone spoke about the constitution and so on. And could you take the budget and austerity through the constitutional court? It has been debated in civil society. We've been thinking about it. The issue is a formulation in the constitution that the government should use its available resources. So what, I will use it later. So what resources are available? So that is a political question. One realizes this because if you say that no, you have a wealth tax of wealth over 3 million rand, and you put the 3% tax on that, and then you have it graduated. So if you have over 7 million rand, you put the then corporate. It's a very interesting fight going on here.
That's the dialectic unfolding in front of us.
Okay. So then you will see from if you follow the discussion about this in the media, you will see that what I would call the corporate economists or the bourgeois economists, whatever, the mainstream financial industry economists, they would say that no, this money is not available. Or they say that for different kind of reasons. And the same people would say about the government employee pension fund, that this money is not available. And I mean, the campaign of the Democratic Alliance in Parliament, oh, you're going to steal the workers' money. You are dipping into, what is the expression? It's kind of, yeah, you want to raid it. You want to raid the government employee pension fund, steal the workers' money. No, the policy of the state pension fund to be to maximize the returns of the DFF in order to maximize the pension of the workers. So Dominic, he never touched upon that, even if there was the intention. But the DFF has a special history, and if you study the history, and there is also some very good articles on the subject. One by Fred Hendricks, which draw quite a lot on research made by a comrade who is not with us any longer, Gavin Duffy, who made research about how the so-called apartheid debt, or the government debt, for the government was kind of like indebted to itself through the state pension fund and paying huge amount of money to the government employee pension fund, which the government employee pension fund in its turn lent back to the government at the interest rate. And you will see that this arrangement is still here today. But the whole construction of it was a political construction of the government employee pension fund after 1994, and it seems clear it was a part of the so-called negotiated settlement. So it was a way of preventing the government to have a more kind of socialistic or progressive inclined policy, because it put a big financial strain on the government finances. Secondly, it guaranteed the income of security staff and police and all the people who have been in the apartheid administration after 1994. And that is why it was changed from a special type of system of pension, which I shall explain, and to the system that we have today. But in all this, do you know that when we speak about the public sector wage bill, have anyone told you that 13%, meaning 13 rand out of every 100 rand paid in compensation to employees, is payment to the government employee pension fund? And that is why who has become completely bloated, and I will try to show it later. That is why, if you remember, I think it was now in December that the public employer said that no, in order to settle these things, this was before they knew that they would win in the labor court. They were a bit scared that they would lose in the labor court. So they tried to settle it by saying that no, you don't have to make the contributions to the GPF this year. That would save us, that would give you a sort of, it would give you a 7% wage increase or something like that. Because, as some of you, or maybe all of you know, you have on your wage 7.5% of the wage you get is deducted, it goes to the GPF. And then there's also an employer contribution to the GPF. Some for the army and these type, I think it's about 60%. For the rest, it's 13.5. Contribution on the pensionable part of the rest. It goes to the GPF. And in 2020, or the year that ended in 31st of March 2020, it was 80 billion rand that went into the GPF in these type of contributions, employer contributions and employee contributions. And these 80 billion, it's quite steadily about 30% of the so-called public sector wage bill. So I don't know if you knew this before or if this is the first time someone said this to you. Do you also know that the State Pension Fund DPF is the biggest creditor of the treasury? So 11%, 11 rand out of every 100 rand that the government has borrowed, which is a part of the state debt, is owed to, has been borrowed from the GPF. And it's paid back at the market interest rate. So the GPF is the biggest creditor of the government, meaning that the government basically owes money to itself, because it's the government. It's the government who are the main and only shareholder and owner of the state pension fund. 16%, 16 rand out of every 100 rand of Eskom's debt is debt that is owed to the GPF, which is paid back at market interest rate. So out of the 480 billion rand that Eskom had in debt, you know from the media and discussions that about 200 billion of that amount is considered as unsustainable debt. You have to deal with this debt of Eskom in some way, or eventually it will go wrong. But last year, 79 billion of these 480 billion was owed to the GPF and paid back to the GPF at market interest rates. Okay? So you get paid back. Yeah, no, there's something that is called bonds. And you know that those of you who have a bond on a house or a car, you know what it is. But bonds, which we speak about here, government bonds, or bonds that are issued by Eskom, or it could be by the Johannesburg municipality, or it could be by a Hellenic municipality or Durban, and Tequini, etc. But treasury bonds, these bonds are traded on the market. So you buy and sell these bonds. And they can shift in price. You can speculate. So it's not like you can't buy and sell your bond on your car and so on, but there's a market for bonds. So loans to such institutions like government and so on is called bonds. And presently, the interest rate on a 10-year treasury bond, which is a loan that you have to pay back in 10 years, the government has to pay back to the lender, to the creditor, this amount in 10 years from now. The interest rate paid every year is 9%, about 9% now, which is an extremely high interest rate. And that is what Dominic spoke about before, when he spoke about attracting foreign investors because of high interest rates. He speak about investors who wants to earn money by lending money to the South African government or to any other player in South Africa, like ESCOM or whatever. ESCOM even paid higher interest rates than 9%. 9% interest rate means that, as you know, if you lend someone 100 rand, after 1 year you should have a 9 rand in income, in interest income from that. So that is what is affecting foreign investors. So the government is playing a very big role also in the larger economy and to the government. It's influencing the government finances by the contributions that it is made to the GPF on the wage bill, on the public sector wage bill, and on the interest rates that the government and ESCOM and Transnet and Samral and other government so-called parastatals or SOEs are paying to the GPF. And the official policy of the GPF, the state fund, is to maximize the returns and then allegedly to the benefit of the pensioners, of the future pensioners. Yeah. So what Peter Boveni says is that it's because we have this debt, the government has this big debt, where the debt service, which mainly is interest payments on this debt, is growing. That is why we have to cut in the public sector and so on. We have to decrease our borrowing. And what is happening, and you can see, I calculated here from the latest budget review. So this divided by that is about 5.9%. And then it grows every year as a kind of effective interest rate on the state debt, which is this. This is the gross state debt. Okay. 10 year tesouro e 11 ainda fica 100%. Yeah, I don't say that. So that is, and this is the dynamic of the situation. So the debt service cost is growing, and it's kind of taking a. This is the interest part of the state expenditure. It's not the non-interest. This is the so-called interest payment of expenditure. Dominic explained before about non-interest, but this is the debt service cost. So now it's very important now. The interest rate here is very important for the debt service cost. Imagine, for example, if the interest rate here would be not a market interest rate, but let's say it would be fixed at 4%. So the effect on the state debt and on the debt service cost would be dramatic. And the reason is that the government presently, or the treasury, is not only paying, it's also taking new loans in order to pay the interest on old loans and to pay back old loans. So if you reduce the interest rate, let's say by 2 percentage points, from 6 to 4%, you will dramatically reduce the debt service costs of the government. Okay? And that such an insight is key to to the proposal that we have been made again and again. And to some comrade who asked, yes, we also have presented this to the Finance Committee of the Parliament. Those who were just officials in the Parliament Budget Committee, they really liked the presentation. But the Deputy DG of the Treasury, he has got angry because he doesn't want to listen to these type of yeah. The interest rate of the debt, which is a market interest rate, and this is an average. I mean, for 10-year Treasury bonds now charge an interest rate from the creditor, which is about 9%. One very good insight to have, which is very simple and childish, but it's extremely important to keep in mind, is that the amount of debt in the economy is equal to the amount of claims. So if you have a debt to someone, that someone has a claim on you. If I borrow 100 rand from the chairperson here, then he has a claim on me. I have a debt of 100 rand, he has a claim on me of 100 rand. So the question, who are the claimants? Who are the creditors? Is extremely important. And sometimes, you know, when it's sort of with a business rescue or whatever, the SAA and so on, then sometimes the business rescue, they sort of, okay, who are the claimants here? Oh, we have the bank, we have this, we have the chairperson here, blah, blah, blah. Can I threaten them? I say that if you don't reduce your claims on this company, you will lose everything. But if you halve your claims on this company, then it will continue. Then you will only lose a little. Remember that in the literature, in the business literature, or the bourgeoisie kind of, they claim that the interest rate, well, it's a payment for a risk taking. That's what they say. I take a risk when I lend money to Dominic, for example. Quite a huge risk is that. So therefore, I claim an interest rate of 12, 13, 40% on it. So that because I'm very anxious. So I want to have a good reward for this. That's what they say. So on that basis, of course, there always a possibility that you lose your money or a part of your money if you lend it to someone. For example, to Tom. Okay. The amount of debt and claims are the same. Who are the creditors? Okay. And when you speak, you have a very strange situation in South Africa because you also have another big player, not at all as big as DPF, but that is the UIF, the Unemployment Insurance Fund. They have also lent money to DPF. About 9-10 billion rand or something like that. And the Charles Marx is sort of, and UIF basically is a very strange fund because you have a official unemployment of over 35% now, is it 32 or 33? And then you have a completely bloated fund called UIF, who they draw upon now because of COVID. So they sort of, UIF in fact is one of the few institutions in South Africa where the government really took money and distributed to those who become unemployed, even if the employer took a lot of this money. They stole the money from people who should not get it. But it was because of the UIF sitting on a fund of 150 billion rand. So how can an institution, an unemployment insurance, it's insurance, you pay insurance money. How is it possible that if you accumulate 150 billion rand in such a fund, if you have a sort of 4, 5, 6 million officially unemployed in the country? It's inexplicable. It's one of these things that makes me crazy. But that is how crazy government policy is sometimes. You should pay out the insurance, of course, to those who are unemployed. But obviously, it's too difficult to get the money from them. I want to add another thing also, and it really speaks to that it would be nice to have another conference and go through other things, but I will just mention this. So when you have this division between the employer the employer contribution to a pension fund and the employee contribution to a pension fund. It is really a political division or an ideological division, because everything at the end of the day is in fact contribution from the worker, from the employee. The reason is, and those of you who have been sitting in wage negotiations, you know this, yeah?
Who contributes 7.5?
It's the worker.
And government contributes
35% or 60% on the wage bill. But the thing is this.
What my assistant might.
So what you think that in the first analysis, you think me as a worker, I contribute 7.5% of my wage, but the government, the employer, he's also kind, because he was also making a contribution of usually 13.5% on the wage bill, okay? On the pensionable part of the wage bill, because some of these remuneration people get is not pensionable, okay?
Comrade, can I request that we start our questions so that the comrade should flow and then.
No, it's kind of, it's not,
Okay.
if it becomes too complicated, then I will say, but if you've been sitting up on doing wage bargaining, then you know there's something called knock-on effects, isn't it? So the employer can say, no, you can't demand these wage demands, because you must think about also, this will also increase my contributions to the pension fund. So and this means, and this is not I'm not speaking Marxist theories, this is textbook theory I'm speaking now. Every economist know, even if they are fascist economists or they are right-wing, they know that the payroll tax, like this contribution, this division between employer and employee is only ideological or political. In reality, the workers is always paying everything to the pension fund, because the part that is paid by the employer is deducted off, is calculated off at the wage bargaining table. I'm just mentioning this now, so it's just to make you. I can speak also about this about inflation. I will show you now. So the treasury is financing its debt by taking new loans presently. That's why it's very important to bring down the interest rate, because a part of the interest rate payment is also financed by taking new loans to market interest rate. Okay? And it's increasing this interest by a little every year, because, yeah, that's the issue. No, if you are indebted more and more, then it's more risky. So if you want us to borrow, to lend you more money now, you have to increase the interest rate. That's how it works. I've already spoken about how the ETF and the ESCOM and Sandal and so on have financed a large part of their loans from ETF. But now I shall present two views on the pension system. First, I present the view of the state pension fund that is the ruling system in South Africa, which is called the fully funded system. Okay, it's a fully funded, which means that from the fully funded view, you kind of imagine what would happen if the company would go bust. Okay, suddenly the company goes bust, and you have been paying pensioners, those who have been pensioners of the company, and they also have a claim on you, because they have a claim, they have an average time until they will pass away, and on that time you have to have money to pay them until they pass away on the average. Then you have also those employees who are already in the company. They have also worked up pension claims on you, which they rightfully should get. So if your company go bust, then you basically should pay out everything that you have accumulated in the pension fund to them. Okay. So the fully funded system is really kind of, it's applicable or reasonable in a way if you have a private mining company with a pension fund, because you don't know if it will continue. But it's quite unreasonable when it comes to having it as a state pension fund.
because the state will not disappear, and there will always be new employees coming who will pay so you have all the employees here, quite a lot of people. Then you have kind of like a box here, and then you say to these people, you are saving for your pensions. You tell them. Then you have fewer pensioners here, and now presently the GPF is financing the pension and benefits of about 400,000 people who have retired. Okay, so when these people here are paying their money here, they basically pay it to the pensioner here. Yeah, like this. But you tell them that you are saving to your pension. Okay? They are gathering points here. And when they come over to this side, then there will be new people here, and you tell them you are saving to your pension. Okay? But what they are doing is that they are paying the money to this person. Now, this box can be constructed in different ways. You can have all kind of systems here. You can, for every rand, you can count points, for example. So depending on how many points you accumulate, that determines what you get when you come over to this side. And then you tell this person, now you get back your pension which you have saved. Okay, but there's nothing never been saved here. Everything is just going directly to the See, it's not like you put your pension. It's not like you have a hole in the tree here. It could be kind of in more like 500 years ago in Europe, or maybe here in South Africa. You know you were getting old, so you were gathering precious things, and you put it in a hole in a tree like this. And then when you can't work any longer, then you go and fetch in the tree like this. Now, what has happened with the fully funded, when the fully funded system comes over to the state, it becomes a state pension fund, then it completely also bloats the financial market. So the GPF is very important for the stock market prices on the Johannesburg Securities Exchange, because is the biggest owner also through the manager PIC. You know that I haven't gone to that, but you have this scandalous PIC who is making, it's a manager. So that is why DEA or anyone in the finance industry and so on would be very angry and would completely object to my presentation here today. Also for personal social reasons, because they know, which is something that we suggest from AIDC, maybe also from Duma Kuguli, he's also suggesting this. You should stop buying shares on the GSE. You should divert most of your investment to the treasury bonds and to SOEs in crisis. And there you shouldn't charge market rates. You should set the market interest rate which secure the pension benefits of you. Because the main task of the GPF is of course to pay pensions and benefits to the spouse. But if you have a surplus over there, and GPF indeed has an extreme surplus, then you use it for other social things. You don't do it in order to prop up the share prices on the JSE, on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. If the government is in crisis, if you have austerity policy that kills people at the hospitals, then you must deal with that for moral and political and whatever reason. Okay? So this change, then from the fully funded view, something catastrophic or small, really a bad thing happened to the GPF last year. Either this column here now, this table is some kind of like 200, a little more than 200 billion rand smaller. All the time here it was growth, where here there was a bad year on the stock exchange, and so almost stagnant here. But here it really fell, and this is where the COVID crisis hit. And because of that GPF being so heavily invested in shares in corporate shares that are traded on the stock market. The ETF formerly lost about 200 billion rand in value in last year. And as a result, the board, they didn't say that in the annual report, they issued a special press statement in November. They postponed the independent actuarial audit of GPF last year. The reason was that the GPF law, I think of 1998 or 96, no, I think it's 1998. It stipulates that you should have a 90% coverage of all the pension claims on you. You remember I spoke about this fully funded things. So if there's a shock in a private company which go bust, okay, then if you have a 90% fully funded, it means that of everything you owe to everyone, you can at least pay 9 rand out of 10. Okay? That is in the DPF law. Okay? So if the state disappears, which Lenin doesn't want the state to disappear, he wants to replace the state with another state. Okay? But someone, I just need this objection if there's someone. If the state disappears, this in a dream, okay, then with 90% fully funded, at least 90% of the worked up claims by pensioners and those who are still, but who are now retrenched and fired, 90%. But the board of the GPF, they have decided 100% fully funded for some reason, which sort of becomes an effort to bloat the GPF even more. So if there had been an audit last year, then the independent auditor, it's Alexander Forbes, they do it. Then they would have said that you can't increase the pension this year. And you also have to change the so-called, the formula for pension benefits. And in the formula for benefits, there's something called actuarial factor. Okay? Actuarial factor. Actuarial factor. So the formula is something like this, that is how many years, it's more complicated like this, but how many years you have been working, and then your salary, the salary, your final 2-3 years, and then there's times the actuarial factor. And the actuarial factor depends on how the fund is doing generally, kind of, and how the economy is doing. Especially how in the fund that is heavily invested on the stock market, like the GPF is, and basically paying with the money of the pensioners, I would say, or members' money. If there's a shock to the stock market, as it was in March last year because of COVID, well, then the auditor, he has to play by the rules. It doesn't matter that the stock market went up again, and in June again, everything was fine. Okay, until next crash. So it was March like this, and then the cut-off date was about here. So you must see, is it fully funded here or not? Okay. And I have calculated this, and I would say that at the 31st of March last year, the GTEC was funded at below 80%. Okay. So there could be no pension increases, no inflation-related things. The actuarial factor and the independent order will have to say, no, you have to increase the contributions also in order to reach up now. But now what they did is, also with the permission of the independent auditor, they postponed it 1 year. They always do it every second year, but the law, the EPS law of 1998, allows them to make it every 3 years. So luckily, they could postpone it to this year. Otherwise, it would have been a scream, at least from PSA, but from everybody else. So even if it's a defined benefit fund, never forget that there's an actuarial factor in the formula. And that actuarial factor is dependent on how the performance of the fund, how much money they are making, and if the value of the assets increasing every year. Okay, now I should go to the next slide. I have kind of 5 slides more. Are you tired?
No, it's not.
Okay. This is still interesting. If it's still not interesting, then you can just yawn. Okay? So I can see that you are sleeping. So this is the other view on the GPF. So that the fully funded view, it looks at the theoretical possibility of the company disappearing. Okay, business is over. Only the pension funds we have built here, and now we are paying out everything. Goodbye, we're paying everything. But the system that was in place before the neoliberal political revolution, I can say, or the political movement took charge over government policy like 30 years ago. It was very common, especially so in the country I come from, but even from other countries where you have reformist, socialist parties in power, coalition with communists. I mean, the ruling paradigm was that the state pension fund, it doesn't need to be fully funded because it just go like this. So you charge the members, people who are working, you charge them fees on their salaries, a payroll tax kind of, which is enough to pay for the pensioners next year, and then you charge them a little more. And in fact, where I come from, my other home country, so to speak, when this type of, it's called pay-go system, it really means pay pensions as you go along. You just see to, okay, can I pay pension now the coming 2-3 years? Okay, I can, because I have these contributions every year, I have this investment income from the fund I have and so on. Yeah, I can go on. And then you have this completely other actuarial, it's called actuarial. It's completely other actuarial theory around. So the audit of such a fund, which is going like this, would be different than an audit of a, is this fund now in good health or not? Or are you crashing? You have to increase the contributions from the employees, or do you have, and if you look at the government employee pension fund, and you see politically what the government and what they did at the negotiated settlement, then you will see how crazy it is. Because every year, the pension, I've gone back as far now to 2010, 11. Every year the fund is running with a surplus, which usually have been over 50 billion rand every year. That is why the government could say to the public sector employee unions in December, no, let's skip the contributions one year, and then you will have 7.5% higher wages because that is your contribution. So that would last year, or this year, now it's, you see, here are the contributions now. These are the contributions both from the employer and from the employees. But I try to tell you that everything really is contributions from the workers, because it's taken away at the wage bargaining table. The part of that's the knock-on effects that they always speak about. And I know it myself because I've been in wage negotiation in the mining industry. And I remember during the platinum strike, these 1,000 rand increases and so on, it was agreed that some of it would not be pensionable because of the knock-on effect. Okay? So this is about formally about 20-25 billion of this is paid by the workers, and formally about 60 billion from the employer. But in practice, everything is paid by the workers. Here, the investment income here, about 2/3 of this investment income of 86 billion last year comes from interest on the money that the GPF have lended to mainly the South African government, but also to Eskom, Transnet, Sandal, Johannesburg Municipality, and another. I will show you a picture. About 32 billion last year came from so-called dividends. And dividends, I think many of you know, is the profit. If you're a shareholder in a company, then the company, every year there's an annual general meeting, which you know is not a democratic meeting. You vote according to how much you own of the company. And they decide if you have one share in the company, maybe you get 1 rand for each share or 5 rand for each share and so on. And sometimes you have a lot of shares. This will become work-free income of 5-6 million. It can be if you have 5-6 million. This is the dividends. Historically, the return or because of the shareholding of the ETF always have been almost a double of what they own in government bonds. So now it's about like 900 to 1 trillion rand in different kind of stock market investments. Of about 200 billion in one single company, which is called NASPERS. And they lost in 31st of March now last year, they lost 40 billion of their value. Yeah, with the COVID thing. NASPERS is an interesting company because they own why it's so profitable, because they are serving the Chinese Communist Party with surveillance of its own population through complicated IT applications and so on. So that's a big customer of this NASPERS, which your pension money now is invested in this company. Anyway, then you have about 550 billion or something like that in different kind of bonds to different kind of interest. And bonds are regarded as a short income because that is an agreement, especially if you have a bond to a government or a government company, because they are obliged, they have to pay this interest rate unless they go in state bust or something like that. It can happen, but it happens every 25, every 30 years. And these are regarded as risky investments. And that is because things like this can happen. It can suddenly drop to 200 billion rand. Which they did here. From 1812 in value 2019 to about 1600 billion in 2020, which is why they postponed the audit, because they didn't want to face the consequences that they had a fully funded system where the law says they must be 90% fully funded, because it would the consequences for the payment of pensions. What would have been the 3.2 increase of pension, which happened from 1st of April last year, would not have been taken place. The auditor would have suggested that they increase the contributions to the pension fund, etc. Yeah. So that is some of the things. The actuarial factor would have been decreased, meaning that the pension claims would have been decreased. All if the auditor would have followed the book. But of course, people are not completely crazy. So that is also why they postponed the audit and say that, the auditor is making his audit per 31st of March, but then it starts to work in June and you see that the stock prices are up again. Okay, I can't, so they have to make these recommendations, and they have done so before. But the government board, the board of the pension fund does not follow these advices because they are crazy advices. Because the fully funded system applied to a state pension fund is crazy. I will tap you that is on your arm, and everybody knows it's crazy. And that is, but it comes in very handy for the finance industry because it really pumps in a lot of money into the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. It's 30-35 billion every year that the GPF kind of has to buy because of its investment policy to place most of its money into shares, into corporate bonds, because they are regarded as giving more money. This giving of more money is divided into two ways when it comes to shares. One is the increase in market value, which is regarded as an income. The other is the dividends paid, which really is imali ingena, really money coming in. The other value is what Karl Marx would call fictitious, which only comes to you if you sell your shares. Then, so it's like if you have a car. So if you have a car and you have the intention to sell it, not to keep it until it dies, so to speak. Then every year you would be kind of stressed and say, oh, how much money have I lost this year now? Now value of the car has shrunk from 150 to 120,000 rand. Oh, I lost 30,000 rand this year. But in reality, you lost nothing if you don't have any intention to sell it. You see? The same is if it would be that the price would increase, like you have a watch, you have a precious watch from your grandfather, which you don't want to part with, but it is gold in the watch, and you can see the gold price is increased now. Now I have earned so much this year, but you have no intention to sell it. Okay, you have earned nothing. Okay, it's only the job. Anyway, this is really cash flows now. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? You are following. So this is really so when you sort of do it as a pay as you go along the pension, then you have a cash flow view. Which country is following that? I don't know if any country is following this now because of the neoliberal hegemony. Sweden followed this policy when I was young and so on, and because of their contribution can be set to a higher rate than what you can tell these people you are saving to your pensions, and then you kind of like you shouldn't do it, you shouldn't lie to people, but then some of it goes to a fund to build new houses in Sweden in the 1960s when the Social Democratic Workers' Party had hegemony in society. And they installed and they built 1 million worker class apartments in the country. For the surpluses, it was not needed to secure this flow of money for the pension. And everybody was of course happy because this became a part of the social wage of society, isn't it? So you can also in a pay-go system, and usually it has been done by kind of socialist or left progressive government, you usually overfund it also because you want to save a little bucket here in the system, which you usually use to buy treasury bonds, state bonds, and you regulate the level. You are not greedy. You say, okay, we want the interest rate of 4% because that is enough for us to kind of make the system go around. And then government say, okay, no, it's fine. Basically, the government is speaking to itself because the government also owns the pension fund. But say, no, fine, that's fine because then we don't have to go to the financial market and borrow this money. Because if we do, then we have to pay 5, 6, 7, 8, 9% on these loans. We borrow it from you instead. It's like when I lend money. If we are in the same family, maybe we become friends. Yeah. Then if I lend you 100 rand, I wouldn't demand the interest rate of 5% or 10%. It would be ridiculous, isn't it? Because lending and borrowing and credit and so on is a social relation. It's only the capitalist system which kind of like depersonalize this and make it into an investment. So the government is investing in your difficulties. Okay, so I could invest in your difficulties, but if I'm your friend, you would punch me on the nose if I come and say I want the interest of 5 rand or 10 rand. It would be silly, ridiculous. Okay, and the same rule should apply between different state entities because they are the same political party, same political majority, and they are basically members of this family. So why should you sort of charge market interest? So I already spoken about this. The actual cash flow money coming into the fund every year, that is what they pay as you go along, pay the pension system, speaking the pay-go system. The change in market values of the financial assets that you have, that is the fully funded view. But even there, with the fully funded view, you shouldn't. 30 years ago, it was not even allowed for the pension funds to buy shares on the stock market because it was regarded too risky. Okay. This is now here. Here you have the fair value of the shares that own in 2019. 763 billion. Primary. Here you have the value. You can see the loss in value here from 763 to 557. So it's a loss of 220 billion rand. Did you know this? didn't know this, did you? Here, when it comes to secondary listing, it's a slight increase. Secondary listing, I'm not really sure what it means on Johannesburg, but the primary listing is the most traded company. It's kind of like the blue chip, MTN, Naspers, you know, this, the big beer company, what is it called? SIB, the beer company, you know. And these are more smaller companies. These unlisted equities, these are equities or shares which are not traded. Okay? So here comes in the kind of DEE policy or projects that the government wants to support. These projects that have been corrupted when the PIC did it and so on. You know, so this is the unlisted project. Then this is how it looks when you divide it. So you see here, the DEPF is owning 70% of the shares in Naspers, and the value of these shares fell with about 40 billion, well, more than 40 billion, from 2019 to 2020, because of the shock from the COVID. And it works like this on the stock market, as many of you know, or might have read about. Like, if I believe that the other traders believe, that I believe, that they believe that the price would fall, then I will sell, and then the price will fall. And that is what's happening in such a situation. Okay? I will not go. Here's the lending to the government. So when they speak about, oh, don't dip into the GPF and sort of you are trashing, you are raiding the GPF and so on, they don't tell us that the government, of the total of about 560 billion rand in bonds, which is interest-bearing loans, about 370, like 60-65% of that is lending to the South African government at the market interest. You can see also from 2019, you can see that the amount has gone up a bit. But you can see for Eskom, which I believe, in my view, this is a scandal. This is a scandal. But the DFAF has reduced its borrowing, its lending to Eskom from 84.5 billion rand to 73. Then there's also bills, so the total becomes 79. So there's not an error in my presentation. But this is regular bonds, and then you have a short term, something that is called bills, which is loans over 1 year loan. These are longer loans. Here you have the credit rating, which most of you have heard about. So Eskom has a bad credit rating, is B. The best credit rating is AAA, and then it goes different kind of, So if you have B, then you are paying high interest rates, which is the argument for why, in order to solve Eskom's debt crisis, of course, in my view, the state pension fund, either they should increase their lending to the government a lot, and then the treasury can support, but at lower rate, because it's already running with a surplus, or it could increase the lending to Eskom in order to stave off the discussion about privatizing Eskom. Okay? So then here, this is all this is for you to study in the annual report of the government pension fund. So here you can see the income from interests from loans, interest, 52.2 billion, incomes from shareholding, 34 billion. You can see the relation. Still, the investment in shares are kind of like 1/3 more, or like 40% more. So historically, the return on the EPF return on holding bonds, which is secure loans, has been about 7.2 or something like that of the amount of loans that they have given. But when it comes to dividends, because here the companies always think about that the share price will increase. So the dividends, when it comes to cash flow, Imali Ingena into the ETF, it's kind of like 3%, 3.1, 3.2%, which is why, from a pay-as-you-go perspective, it would be much better for the pensions and for the financial health of the ETF to invest in treasury bonds than to invest in the stock market. But from the perspective of the fully funded system, now bonds, they don't fluctuate so much in value. They are just going up and down like that. No, we have to have it in shares because they go up and up and up. And Johannesburg is the most, it's regarded as the most overvalued stock market in the world. So it's kind of regarded as, by many, as having a big bubble, which must come down at some point. I'm soon finished now. I think I can be finished now. So what we are suggesting is kind of regulated lending from the government employee pension fund to the state in order to fend off the austerity policy and the debt crisis of ESCOM, and sort of to break the wage freeze of the public sector workers and to fill the vacancies. So the GPF, because of the low return from stock market investment of only like 3% on what you have in shares, if the GPF would give regulated lending to the same amount to the government at 4%, then the GPF would be even more healthier than having it in shares. And it wouldn't stand the risk of the shares fluctuating like this.
I'm chairing the session.
So that's the, and when you say this, then the DA and unfortunately also PSA and FEDUSA, they are saying, oh, but I mean you can also, if you to make them shut up, in order to make them shut up, you can ask them, why can't we increase the benefits paid to 150 billion here instead of, why do we need to build this fund like this? Why can't you increase the pensions with 50%? I would be against this because it would be a very antisocial thing to suggest. You should rather use such surpluses in order to fend off the austerity policy and the debt crisis. But I tell you, one reason why the deputy DG is so angry when you are suggesting this is because people Goweni and these guys, they kind of need this debt crisis in order to pursue their basic policy, which is to reduce, one of the main things is to reduce the public sector as a share of the economy. So you need to have this enemy of the big debt. You can't solve it like this. I mean, and one reason why you can't solve it like this also is that if you would have a government taking this step, there will be an immediate reaction from the finance industry. Oh, the government has gone mad. Sell off your shares, blah, blah, blah. And then you have to go in to control the capital movements of the country, and you will have, it will be a very nice, interesting situation. Because to do like this, as we propose it, it's a classical, what can I say? It was completely reasonable 30 years ago, 40 years. It's not rocket science, it's completely reasonable. But now it's kind of like the most communist policy you ever can imagine, kind of. So the whole goalpost has been shifting politically over 3 decades. But this is basically what we have been pushing. And I saw now also in Cosato's document that there is something there in a long document. I think it's around, Dominic printed out page 129 or something in this document. You will see that Cosato mentioned this solution for the GPS. But I don't feel that they are pushing it. Okay, thank you.
I think you're stimulus.